My name is Michael, and I'm a professor of marine biology. The ocean, its mysteries, its vastness, has always been my passion and my refuge. I've spent countless hours studying marine ecosystems, the behaviors of aquatic life, and the fascinating intricacies of undersea habitats. But none of those wonders compared to the enigma that was my wife, Nicole, or, more precisely, the woman I thought I knew. We met in the most mundane way imaginable. I was in the process of buying a house, browsing one open house after another, until I stumbled upon a real estate agent with a brilliant smile and a magnetic charm that lit up every corner of the room. Her name was Nicole. She was sharp, articulate, and exuded a confidence that made her seem larger than life. I was smitten almost immediately. We started dating soon after, bonding over drinks, dinners, and long conversations about life. Little did I know how much she would come to dominate my thoughts, my heart, and eventually my nightmares. Our relationship escalated quickly. The connection felt effortless, and we seemed to share common dreams about building a life together. Within months, I found myself on one knee holding a ring that shimmered with promise. She said yes, and before long, we were married in a small ceremony attended by a handful of friends and colleagues. Looking back, I realize how swiftly everything happened, but at the time, felt like destiny. For the first couple of years, our marriage was solid, or so I believed. The early phase was filled with Sunday brunches on our porch, easy laughter, movie nights, and spontaneous weekend trips. My work as a marine biology professor often took me out to sea for research, but whenever I was home, Nicole was always there to greet me with warmth, or so it seemed. Yet subtle cracks started appearing around our third year. It was never anything obvious at first. It could be something like how she used to leave her phone face up on the coffee table, that suddenly began placing it face down, or how she started getting text messages at odd hours and dismissed them as work emergencies. Then came her late nights. Nicole worked as a real estate agent, and yes, sometimes her job demanded flexible hours. But each time she came home well past midnight, she would rattle off a perfectly packaged excuse: a last minute showing, a networking event, a late dinner with important clients. I wanted to trust her. I truly did. I gave her the benefit of the doubt every single time. It's human nature to cling to trust, especially when the alternative, suspecting betrayal, feels like an admission that your marriage is failing. Yeah, I'm a scientist by profession, driven by data, patterns, and facts. It's in my nature to scrutinize anomalies, to investigate inconsistencies. Nicole evidently assumed that her intricate web of excuses would always hold up, that I would never piece together what lay beneath her carefully spun stories. That assumption was her downfall. It turned out she was cheating on me with a man named Andrew Hall, a name that meant nothing to me at first. He was old money, having inherited a fortune from his father, a once prominent oil tycoon in Texas. Andrew, from what I gleaned, was not particularly gifted in managing his wealth. He lived large, threw extravagant parties, and indulged in anything that piqued his interest. His reckless spending didn't faze him. He believed his inheritance was a bottomless well. Nicole sold him a gargantuan mansion in the most exclusive neighborhood in town, a sale that netted her an eye-popping commission. That was how they met. The transaction itself wasn't the real issue. Real estate was her job. After all, the problem was that she fell under his spell. She found Andrew's wealth, power, and carefree lifestyle irresistible. And judging by how brazenly she returned home late, it seemed she assumed I'd never question her fidelity, or perhaps she simply didn't care if I did. At first, I expected that she would file for divorce and run off into Andrew's arms, but I was in for a rude awakening. They wanted me to remain in the picture. Andrew, it seemed, got a twisted thrill from having Nicole remain married to me while he lavished her with money, extravagant outings, and yes, sex. If she ended up pregnant, their grand scheme was that I would unknowingly raise his child. It was a game of power for Andrew, of domination. He wanted to show he could have another man's wife, keep her, and force that man need to take on fatherly duties if a child came into the mix. I only discovered the gory details of this plot by enlisting the help of a very tech-savvy student of mine. Teaching marine biology puts me in contact with all sorts of brilliant young minds, some of whom have very specialized skills. This student managed to hack into Nicole's phone, and with a bit of digital digging, all the secrets spilled out before me. Text messages between her and Andrew, explicit photos, voice memos detailing their next steps, references to me as the oblivious husband. They were sneering at me behind my back. The heartbreak was profound at first, but soon sorrow gave way to something more dangerous: resolve. I discovered that they were plotting to drug me during an upcoming yacht party, an event lavishly hosted by Andrew, to which Nicole handed me a formal invitation. According to their texts, the plan was to slip a mild sedative into my drink so I'd be too docile and disoriented to protest or even fully comprehend their next move. They aimed to humiliate me right there on the yacht, taking everything a step beyond ordinary betrayal. Naturally, I accepted the invitation. Nicole, wearing that radiant smile I once adored, seemed pleased by my eagerness to attend. I played my role well, feigning ignorance, even praising the idea of a fancy yacht outing. They likely imagined me as a clueless lamb walking into the lion's den. But I'd done my homework. I knew precisely what over-the-counter sedative they planned to use, and I knew how to protect myself. More importantly, I had a plan of my own. Having access to specialized chemicals in my lab, compounds most people don't even know exist, I carefully selected an experimental hallucinogen known for inducing vivid, unsettling visions. My plan was simple: turn the tables. If they wanted to drug me, they were going to be the ones floating on a mind-bending cloud of nightmares. Stepping onto Andrew's yacht, I felt an odd sense of control. The irony of the situation didn't escape me. Andrew stood on the deck wearing a crisp linen shirt. All smiles and feigned politeness. He extended a hand. "So you're Professor Michael, right? I've heard a lot about you," he said. "You're a lucky man. Nicole is absolutely fantastic." I forced a grin, shaking his hand while keeping every ounce of my composure steady. "She is indeed remarkable," I replied, careful not to betray my knowledge. Two towering bodyguards flanked Andrew, arms crossed and faces set in stone. Clearly, he wasn't taking any chances in case things went sideways. Still, he underestimated me. He'd assumed the worst I'd do was shout, maybe swing a punch or two. He had no idea I already knew everything. I mingled, slowly walking around the yacht, noting its exits and layout. I memorized corridors, stairwells, and hatch locations, not out of idle curiosity, but as part of my contingency plan. The yacht was no small vessel. Andrew's wealth was evident in its plush interiors, the polished wooden banisters, and the elegantly set dining area where a sumptuous meal awaited us. Eventually, Andrew announced that we would set sail. The engines roared, and we drifted away from the shoreline. Strangely enough, while others might have felt uneasy leaving land behind, I felt at home. The sea is where I belong, a realm I've dedicated my life to studying. Over the next few hours, as the yacht glided across calm waters, Andrew and his goons laughed, drank, and radiated smug confidence. Meanwhile, I explored the boat under the guise of curious admiration. In reality, I was scouting the kitchen to identify which drink would be mine. I recognized it easily, a cocktail set aside with unusual care, no doubt spiked with the sedatives they had acquired. They had no clue that every hors d'oeuvre, every drink on board would soon be laced with my hallucinogenic compound. Taking advantage of moments when no one was watching, I lightly sprayed or dripped my colorless, odorless chemical into the various shared dishes. A few microdroplets in the communal platter, some discreet spritzes on the garnishes. It was an art form of sabotage. I wasn't proud of it. Sometimes you have to take extraordinary measures to confront extraordinary evil. When dinner was served in the yacht's spacious dining salon, Andrew made a big show of proposing a toast. He stood glass in hand, proclaiming, "To new friendships and boundless adventures." Nicole, seated across from me, gave a radiant smile. The bodyguards, posted on either side of the room, also raised their glasses. I lifted mine, ensuring everyone saw, then casually set it back down, untouched. Moments later, Nicole leaned in close, whispering, "You should drink honey. Don't be rude." "I'm watching my alcohol intake," I said with a shrug. "Gives me headaches. Bad for my health." Her eyes clouded with brief confusion. She and Andrew exchanged a fleeting look, the tension in the air thickening. Their plan hinged on me consuming that spiked drink. If I didn't play my role, how could they humiliate me? A server hurried over, offering me a non-alcoholic beverage, likely also dosed. I accidentally knocked it over, apologized profusely, and reached for my steak instead. The others were visibly on edge, but they didn't push the point. They had no idea my carefully concocted revenge was already in motion, saturating their own meals. Sure enough, it didn't take long for the effects to manifest. Andrew, who'd been brimming with cocky energy, started blinking in confusion. His pupils dilated and he began giggling at random intervals. Nicole's posture slackened. Her carefully styled hair fell across her forehead, and her lips parted in a lazy grin. The bodyguards, after devouring their plates of prime rib, leaned against the walls, occasionally gesturing wildly at invisible shapes. I quietly finished my meal, the only one at the table maintaining a veneer of composure. The hallucinogen worked faster than I'd anticipated, possibly because they mixed it with alcohol. Their senses warped in real time. They were seeing wonders and horrors that weren't there. A swirl of color, shadows, and illusions consumed them. With the group sufficiently intoxicated by my compound, I walked calmly to the helm where the captain was stationed. He was a wiry, weather-beaten man who looked as though he'd spent half his life on open waters. I handed him a slip of paper with coordinates. There's a special site nearby, I told him, feigning enthusiasm. A natural phenomenon recently reported. Mind taking us there? He eyed me suspiciously. Andrew had hired him, after all, and presumably instructed him on the overall route. But the captain, unaware that Andrew was currently in the throes of a powerful hallucination, merely shrugged. Sure thing, he said. I've got no orders otherwise. What none of them knew was that, 2 days prior, I had tracked the location of a dead whale reported floating offshore. Likely an orca hunt gone awry, the whale's carcass had drawn in a wide range of scavengers from sharks to seabirds. It was the kind of raw, brutal scene that captures the dark side of the ocean's cycle of life and death. Perfect for what I had planned. As the yacht altered course, I returned to the main cabin to check on my unwitting victims. Andrew sat slumped in a cushioned armchair, giggling intermittently as though someone were telling him an endless string of jokes. Nicole was swaying side to side, softly humming a tune I couldn't recognize. One of the hulking bodyguards mumbled about flying fish in the cabin. The other swiped at the air as if trying to catch floating stars. The entire tableau had a disturbing yet comical quality, like a twisted dream sequence in a B-horror film. Eventually, we slowed, the engines eased, and I felt the gentle bobbing as the yacht idled in open water. I stepped onto the deck, gesturing for them to follow. The sea breeze was refreshing, carrying the tang of salt and the faint stench of decaying flesh. Sure enough, a bloated whale carcass floated not far from the boat, ringed by dorsal fins and diving seabirds. It was a stomach-turning sight, a testament to nature's unflinching cruelty and efficiency. Come on, everyone, I said, feigning excitement. You'll never see anything like this on TV. Andrew staggered over, leaning heavily on railing. He gazed out at the dead whale and the circling sharks with childlike wonder. Look at the big fish, he mumbled, letting out a giggle that sent chills down my spine. Nicole joined him, her eyes glazed and vacant. The bodyguards remained in the background, lulled into docility by the swirl of chemical illusions. This was my moment. I gently took Nicole by the hand, guiding her closer to the edge. I had questions, one in particular that had been gnawing at me. Why? Why had she betrayed me so completely? Why had she chosen this path instead of simply being honest? Nicole, I asked quietly, so close that my voice was nearly lost to the rushing of the waves. Why did you cheat on me? Was it the money? The power? She blinked as if trying to recall a practiced speech, then spoke in a dull monotone. He has power, she muttered. He's smaller than you, a bad lover. But he has that control. I wanted it too. The rawness of her confession, even under the influence of the hallucinogen, hit me hard. She didn't even bother denying her shallow motivations. There was something undeniably tragic in her honesty, but it also stoked my anger. I left Nicole's side and turned to Andrew, who stood at the railing, grinning at the scene of carnage in the water. He was too far gone to sense the menacing undertone in my voice. What made you think it was okay to destroy my marriage? I asked. Was it just a game for you? Andrew cocked his head, eyes glassy. I'm a taker, he slurred. I see something I want and take it, and your wife wanted me to. Marriages, Mar, they're hell. He paused, swallowing hard. My mother told me that over and over. I guess I believed it. His logic was twisted but laced with a sort of childlike sadness. He wasn't just a predator. He was a damaged soul whose worldview had been corrupted, but that didn't excuse the cruelty of his actions. My voice hardened. Andrew, I said, jump in. Go say hello to the sharks. He blinked, teetering on the edge of reason. Perhaps in his warped mental state, he interpreted my command as a friendly challenge or an enchanting invitation. Without hesitation, he'd hoisted himself over the railing and plunged into the sea. Those circling sharks didn't need a second invitation. The moment Andrew hit the water, they converged, guided by primal instincts triggered by splashing and the promise of fresh prey. Their fins sliced the surface, forming an ominous triangle around him. I turned to Nicole, who stared at me in mute horror. "Join him," I said, my words as cold as the ocean depths. For a moment, her eyes cleared, as if recognition dawned on her. But it was too late. Perhaps desperate to prove herself, or still swimming in a delirium, she climbed onto the railing and jumped, letting out a strangled cry as she hit the water. Then I glared at the two bodyguards. "Follow your boss," I ordered. Fear and confusion flickered across their faces, but the drug-addled haze robbed them of coherent judgment. One after another, they jumped in. What happened next was both horrific and strangely cathartic. Sharks sensed movement and fear, and the feeding frenzy began almost immediately. Andrew's screams cut through the sound of churning water but were quickly muffled. Nicole's shrieks rose for a moment, then vanished beneath the thrashing waves. One of the guards, a huge man who could have easily overpowered three people on land, kicked wildly, but each frantic movement only drew more attention from the sharks. I forced myself to watch, at least for a few seconds, reminding myself that this was the path they had chosen. They had orchestrated a plan to drug me, to humiliate me in front of God knows who, to twist the knife of betrayal deeper than I thought possible. Now they were meeting a fate they'd effectively courted by crossing my threshold of tolerance. "Man overboard!" I suddenly yelled, putting on a show of alarm. The captain rushed over, eyes darting from me to the telltale stains of red blossoming on the surface of the water. "What the hell happened?" he demanded, struggling to maintain professional composure. They jumped in," I said, trying to sound convincingly distraught. "I warned them there were sharks around that dead whale, but they didn't listen." The captain barked into his radio, calling for the Coast Guard to assist. He directed me to stay put, stay calm, but it was already too late. By the time the Coast Guard cutter arrived, the water was still, aside from the drifting remains and swirling red clouds, grim evidence that nature had taken its course. The Coast Guard crew searched meticulously, shining bright searchlights, using powerful hoses to ward off sharks and scan for survivors. They found scraps of clothing and a few pieces of what might once have been limbs. There were no bodies to recover. The police questioned me. I recounted the story, how we'd come across a whale carcass, how Andrew boasted that he could swim with sharks, how Nicole and the bodyguards followed suit. It sounded insane, but in the face of no contradictory evidence, and with a phone filled with messages revealing that Nicole and Andrew had planned to drug me, the authorities had no reason to suspect I was anything but a victim of their reckless plot. They found large quantities of sedatives and narcotics among Andrew's and Nicole's belongings, reinforcing my statements about their intentions. A week later, a dismembered human leg washed up on a northern beach. DNA tests confirmed it belonged to Nicole. The police reopened the investigation briefly, questioning me once more, yet with no clear forensics to tie me to foul play and the obvious presence of sharks in the area. They had little choice but to close the case. The official ruling was that they drowned and were consumed by sharks after making a tragically foolish decision. 2 years passed. I moved on, rebuilding my life in the quiet way one does when trying to outrun the ghosts of betrayal. My work became my refuge once again. I immersed myself in research, traveling to coral reefs in the Caribbean and the turquoise waters of the Pacific. Ironically, it was during a trip to Jamaica, an all-inclusive resort getaway, that I met a remarkable woman named Rachel. She had lost her husband in the Afghan war, and though her grief was profound, she carried herself with grace. Our connection was slow and cautious, built on genuine respect. Eventually, talk turned to our pasts. Over a late-night dinner, as the ocean breeze swept across the beach, Rachel asked me, "Michael, how did you manage to afford all these trips? I know academia doesn't exactly pay a fortune." I took a breath, my gaze drifting to the dark sea beyond. "Well, my late wife had a substantial life insurance policy," I explained, swirling the ice in my cocktail. "She named me the sole beneficiary. And I suppose you could say I hired a shark to get rid of her." Rachel's eyes widened, but there was no condemnation in them, only curiosity tinged with sorrow. Perhaps she understood that sometimes the truths we carry are heavier than any anchor. Or perhaps she simply recognized a soul who had walked through fire and come out scared but alive. And that, dear listeners, is the dark and twisted saga I've chosen to share with you today. The ocean can be unforgiving, a realm of deep unknowns and primal predators. Yet, as cruel as nature can be, human cruelty often rivals it. Betrayal, greed, and lust for power can sink their teeth into a life as surely as any shark. Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow Lost Relation Chronicles for more tales that brush up against the darkest corners of human nature. Sometimes the greatest monsters aren't the ones lurking below the water's surface, but the ones we invite aboard our own ships.